This is the One Shot Growth Podcast. No fluff, real business. Hosted by Daniel Radabaugh and Derek Boyd, where business, mindset, and real life collide through real conversations, real experiences, and figuring it out together. If you're building, learning, and figuring it out too, you're in the right place.
What's going on? We're heading out to Lubbock, Texas, going to the Damage Prevention Council Excavation Safety Summit for Lubbock. So this is a new one for us. We haven't been out here to this one yet. We've done meddling quite a few times, but been to the one in Galveston for the Texas 811. So we got us come up here and speak in Lubbock, and got a couple good presentations we're going to give. So doing Mindset Matters, and then adding a new one to the mix called Closing the Loop. Mindset Matters, Eric and I have been talking quite a bit on the mental health side of things, and making sure, take care of your employees just as much as you're trying to take care of your equipment. I think it's been received very well in communities we've been involved in. We're looking forward to doing this one this week, and adding another presentation to the mix, talking about how to really receive communication from your employees, and how employees react to certain things, how they receive, present information to one another, and how to really take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's an exciting time because we're starting to see a lot more openness to the topics on mental health is starting to come into the forefront. We've had an uphill fight to constantly try to work around the stigmas behind mental health and where that sits. And thankfully, there's a lot of people pushing on making these topics more comfortable to talk about, and realizing how important it is to discuss on both the personal and a professional level. So we're super pumped that we get the opportunity to come talk on these topics. And I think we can, for the most part, agree that communication is one of the biggest areas for improvement that we could have in the oil and gas industry. So it's going to be really special for us to dive into this kind of pathway and looking glass of how we've found to be beneficial for us to look at communication, and some ways to help people learn how to do that better.
Absolutely. I think the mental health piece of it, talking about mindset, let's just kind of dive into the two presentations, get a little better understanding of what we're doing and what we're actually trying to do. You and I, we come from military backgrounds. We've both been involved in oil and gas ever since, and we see a lot of similarities. I think for us, it's real easy to forget the mental health side when you're out there working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 10 and 3s, and it makes it difficult. Why? Because you're out there by yourself or with your crew. You're away from your family. You're not being around your kids anymore near as much as you used to. And it's kind of like a military deployment, just short little stints. So you come home, and what happens? Your wife's been taking care of the kids. She's been paying the bills. She's been doing a lot of the quote unquote dad stuff. And that's kind of what brought us into these conversations and wanting to share tools, tricks, tips, and just advice, be there for one another, is the community that we grew up in. never talk about this stuff.
Right.
And now we're getting to a point where people are starting to pay attention, and we just hope that we can keep sharing it and keep getting more and more people involved and really looking at additional angles of, are you taking care of yourself? Are you keeping your own mental health in a good place? Are you relaxing when you can? Disconnecting when you can? Doing these little tips and tricks that we share about getting rid of stress. You going to the gym, you're doing breathing exercises, or you reading a book, or you're just constantly working. Now, for me, it's always been really hard to disconnect from work. I go home and I just want to do more, especially as an entrepreneur. So it's been a challenge, man. And we've come up with some ways. We've been able to help some people do it. And we hope that y'all take a little bit of this information and knowledge and can put it to use and practice on your own side.
Well, like you said, we, for a long time, the kind of cultural expectation was leave all that at the door and show up ready to work. You don't bring your personal stuff into the business arena. When you come back on hitch, back on tower, whatever you're expected to do in your role, you're pretty much expected to leave everything that's going on outside of that behind you. And the problem with that is there's so much of that that drives the everyday, and how you show up and how you perform your role. Aspects of being human are not really, you don't really shut those off. So trying to play inside of a strategy game that's asking you to not be yourself, even though the self is what drives the role, which leads to the outcome that everybody's striving for. It's not something that you can leave out. It's not something you can leave out of the master formula to expect a great outcome. Sure, everybody can align around SOPs and processes and doing work, but the mental health piece of everyday life is, ironically, probably the most important driver to how that likelihood of success plays out. So trying to step into the work arena and be in a culture where that's not supported, we've seen how that's played out over the years by just neglecting it and not creating awareness and working together to find other opportunities to bring that back into the forefront and kind of help you balance yourself out.
Some of the topics, kind of the discussion that we're going to be going through during these presentations, we dive pretty heavily into what it looks like out in the field. I think that's been something that the audience is receiving well at each one of these. We talk through our personal stories, and coming out of the service, one of the big things that has always kind of impacted people more so in these presentations has been the impact it's had on my life. Mental health, it's something that it's hard to share. The stories that I tell, I was that guy, man. I was the one struggling and didn't have an output, didn't have somebody to really talk to. And when you're in a high stress environment, being in the military or being out on hitch with no release, what happens? You ball it up as long as you possibly can. Eventually, that ball's going to get so big it's going to burst. And that makes things difficult. And I can't express it enough that you've got to get out there and actually try and find a way to alleviate that stress and to get your mind back to a centered state. You and I are side by side almost 6-7 days a week, and I can't vent to you about you if you're stressing me out. You can't vent to me about me stressing you out. We're another conversation, another presentation that we're doing is that communication piece and understanding who each other is. So I'm a high D, drive, push. And the reason we work so well together, and also can be the detriment of our business, is you're there to check the brakes, make sure that, hey, we're doing things in line with what our true mission and values are. So if I'm pushing too hard and heavy and you're pumping the brakes, it can stress me out. I have to remember to look at it differently, which we do now, right? But people that haven't gone through some of the assessments and stuff that we do and aren't putting that stuff into practice, what happens? It just balls up. And I don't like being told to stop, slow down. You don't like being told, let's go without context.
Right.
It makes it hard.
Well, and kind of speaking of what you said on the mental health aspect and then how that other layer ties in with it, when there's so little encouragement on both of those fronts to unpack that, create that space to work on those things through other practices or means, or whether that's professionally working with someone who's clinically able to work with you on those things in a therapy or modality setting. All those things, when they're not talked about regularly and they're not encouraged, that mental state is a huge, probably the biggest driving impact on, like you said, how we show up every day. Then you add a communication layer on top of that, where you're plugging into environments where people send and receive information differently than you do, and kind of contextualize the what, the how, the why completely differently than other people on the team. So you've kind of got this double-edged sword that's working against you, when what makes you a human is heavily driven by your mental state. You're not talking about that. You're not encouraged to bring that into the forefront of conversation. And then the lack of context around the temperament wirings, the communication styles, and all of that. It's a recipe for disaster at some point, like you said, when there's no context, there's no clarity, there's no support. That usually turns into suppression. And the longer you bottle it up, because it's not the norm, it's not a conversation that's encouraged to have, where do you go with it? You keep moving forward because that's what's expected of you. You show up and do your job. We don't care about the rest. That's why we pay you a paycheck. But there's so many factors that go into being at your best output through those lenses that you're leaving on the table if you don't have those things kind of outlined and you're working on them.
Absolutely. And you look at it and say, okay, my employee, he went home off edge. He comes back, and all of a sudden he's extremely tired. He's not showing up to his full self, like you said. And he's got an attitude problem now. Well, what are you not taking into perspective? Are you not looking at, had a family member die, pass on? He's going through a divorce his kid was sick for the whole week he was home, and he had to leave his kid home sick. He couldn't take care of it because he had bills to pay. Is he having financial issues? There's so many different things that affect our day-to-day lives that we don't look at, and we don't consider to ask. You know, if you got an employee that's really, really struggling, when's the last time you said, "Hey, man, how you doing? Hey, you holding up all right? I notice you're a little more tense than usual. You know, I'm here if you need to talk." A lot of us don't do that. A lot of us look at it and go, "Hey, he's just acting out. Let's reprimand him. Let's fire him." And then all you're doing is adding to the problem. Whereas he could be the best employee in the world for you if you just ask the one simple question, "Hey, man, how you doing?" He knows you care. And now he's willing to work because he got it off his chest. He just needed a vet. Hell, you might be able to even help him. You might have some advice that can change that young man's life. But you don't know because you don't ask. So, I think it goes both ways too, though, right? When's the last time you looked at your boss and said, "Hey, I'm just letting you know, man, like, my mental state is not 100% here today. I know I'm supposed to go get on that forklift and move boxes around a pad for a frac job. Or I know I'm supposed to get in that truck and deliver this material across the state." Or any of the, whatever your job title or job position work scope is for the day, you know. But being as we're talking about the Excavation Summit, you know, it could be a trench operator, it could be a welder, it could be a crane operator, anything. And do you really need to be in that driver's seat of that crane or driving that excavator today when you're thinking about home? Probably not. So I urge everybody to look at it from a dual lens and really say, are we showing up at our best today? And if not, who have I told? And the other side of it, is my employee showing up at his best? And if not, have I asked him why? And have I left the door open enough to be able to let him speak it, you know?
Well, and that brings up a good point. When we normally look through a job career lens, what is the status quo on how that situation is guided and measured? It's usually through a skill lens. You have a white paper resume, pretty much doesn't ask hardly any questions at all about who are you as a person. It basically just lists what are your skills and what have you done? What's your past experience? Then you go into the job arena. What is most of the concentration around? Almost exclusively skills training, certifications. How much time, money, and energy is spent on making sure that everybody has the latest and greatest safety requirement? You've got everybody focusing on SOPs, processes, training requirements, measuring KPIs, OKRs, everything that goes into the skills of the job. Hardly ever talking about the human side that makes up those roles. And a part of the reason why it's so tough to make those conversations happen is because we don't talk about them. How can we expect leadership to feel comfortable guiding those conversations when it's not the norm for us to talk about that stuff anyway? And on the other side, how can we expect an employee to feel comfortable bringing it up if it's been so culturally ingrained in us that if I speak up, I may be jeopardizing my job. The reason it's hard to talk about is because so few people know how to navigate actually talking about it and having hard conversations. And, well, if somebody has an issue going on and there's something that's affecting their performance, how does a manager have that conversation without having done some sort of legwork into understanding how to have those conversations in a productive way? Not just, man, I don't know what's up with that dude, but he ain't acting right. And I'll tell you one thing, if he's not going to show up and do what we ask him to do, then we'll find somebody who will. How many times have you heard that? Or somebody has really a huge amount of weight on their shoulders with everything that's going on that has nothing to do with work, but they don't feel like they have the freedom to have a conversation around that because their spot in line is directly tethered towards performance and outcomes. And if you don't get in where you fit in and execute, then you may be asked to leave. And if that's all you have to hold your family together, you got to make that money to pay the bills and keep things going. It's super easy for you to just bottle it up because we aren't having these conversations from a normal layer lens of this is completely a natural part of being human instead of it's being suppressed. And there's how much dollars and resources being poured into technological advances and logistics and golf tournaments and marketing and all this dumb stuff that is sometimes it's beneficial, but let's be real. The amount of money that's spent on the stuff that's not bringing true value versus the lack of money that's being spent on all this stuff is crazy what the difference is there on how little is being invested into these areas when it's the most important driving pieces that make the team successful anyway. Well, and I get on my soapbox about this because it genuinely pisses me off that we have to fight so hard to make mental health and communication be looked at like it's normal. Human driving a role, you can't take those aspects away from every human and expect it to be a polished outcome on the other side. It's like, for how much you pour into all this other time spent, money spent, energy spent on mastering the craft, on what sort of configurations and programming and equipment and logistics and all that is going, how many times a week, a month, a year, what sort of programs are you looking into? What are you studying for yourself? If you don't know, what are you doing on your own accord to look at the options out there on how to understand this better? Technology, we've come so far with what's available. Anybody can have an endless supply of information and knowledge with books, courses, programs. Like there's really no excuse anymore to say that I don't know how to navigate these areas when there's so much out there that is available to people if they make the effort to go and explore it.
I think a lot of the companies out there now are starting to look at it more so than they used to. You know, when you and I started speaking on mental health, talking about what really needs to be looked at as far as growth within your business and not looking at your employees like they're just another machine or another number. They're starting to get there. They don't know how to get there, right? And that's been a big part of our educational platforms. It's just trying to show that, hey, it's not hard. You just have to talk. And you have to be open to communication. You have to be able to listen to what is really going on with your employees. Because it is hard for them to talk.
Yeah.
And, you know, we did an episode last week called Black Culture. And businesses operating from Black culture is exactly that. They're talking down to their employees. They're not allowing them to speak. They're looking at everything from we don't have this, so we're failing. State of mind. And with mental health, if you're operating in that mindset and you're saying, well, he's not doing good enough, or he's being more negative than he usually is, you're already starting off on the wrong foot, because I'm not going to come talk to you if I hear that.
Yeah.
If I hear you talking to one of our other crews or talking to another foreman or superintendent, you say, man, Mike's just all of a sudden he's going to the shitter, man. I think he's spending more time in there than he does out here working. Well,
Why is that?
why is it? Does he have a stomach problem? Maybe. Or is he just trying to get away from the work because he needs a place to go recenter and think, because he's struggling and he can't do it all? Maybe he doesn't want to be on that excavator today because his wife passed away or his father passed away and he's not in the right mindset. So what's he doing? He's trying to figure out the only way he can not be on that excavator and hurt somebody is by going to the restroom and sitting in there and just trying to gather his thoughts. All you're seeing is the fact that, hey, he's skipping out on work today. So then you get mad. You go tell the superintendent what's going on. You're talking to your boss about what's going on and saying, man, we need to fire him, this and that. Well, two things happen. Number one, you fire the guy, not realizing that you could have been there for him as a human. Number two, not one of those other employees that heard that conversation or was around there and saw what happened is ever going to come to you about anything. You know, even if they don't hear it, employees talk to each other. Man, why'd you get fired? I got fired because my father-in-law passed away, or my father passed away, and my mindset wasn't right for 2 days. I needed a break, but I couldn't ask for a break because we were always go, go, go. We're never doing enough. You know, that lack culture is one of the biggest drivers in business for a bad mental health outlook on your employees. What can happen?
Yeah, and to kind of clarify the stance behind the frustration, we're not shaming anybody if they haven't figured out how to navigate around this, or they're just trying to figure out what that looks like. The frustration comes with, I can't tell you how many times we've been in wellness conferences, mental health discussions. Everybody in the room at these events, they get it. They understand how important this is and how much of an impact this causes. There is no trouble going into any one of these types of events where buy-in is even of question. The challenging part is because the stigma is so deep and there's such a lack of practice and effort into it, what's going to come out of everybody being in the room that believes it is a big deal and knows it's a big deal, but then has to go out and try to translate that to the workforce? We're not trying to convince everybody there who's already bought in. We're trying to convince the people that are not paying attention to this stuff how big of an impact it's actually making on their culture and their people just to show up every day to work. So we can talk about this for days and days on how important it is, but in order to tear down the walls of the stigma behind it, the kind of casual, like polite conversation around mental health and communication, it's not going to get the job done in the same manner that being extremely accountable and starting to get a pretty, semi-aggressive about these conversations it's got to start happening. Because sure, we can listen to some light encouragement all day long, but until our leadership actually starts demonstrating that it is okay, there are resources available, all of us can meet off site and we all are bought in and we believe it, but what happens to everybody else who's not interested in that, who doesn't show up for that? it's fallen on deaf ears. So the passion behind this is that we have lived in these cultures long enough to see what the lack of produces. And it produces a watered down, sometimes toxic culture where you try to remove those aspects of a human that's in a role doing work. And it's just, when you look at it through that lens or formula, it almost seems silly that we're even having to have that conversation, that we spend so much time on this other side of how we operate every day and little to no time on the people that actually make up the roles that do the work that we ask them to do.
Yeah, man, we're obviously extremely passionate about this, man. Like, you and I, we've had some very heated conversations with folks that just don't get it. And every time we do one of these presentations, we have to make sure on the front side that you and I are repetitively saying to one another, make sure when we're talking through this piece that we're not talking down to people. Why? Because we don't want this view of mental health to be, these guys are just bashing us for doing this stuff and we have no idea what to do with it. So it gets frustrating for you and I.
Yeah.
Because we do understand it. And we've been able to say, I really need to figure out who this person is. I really need to understand what stress they're going through. And I really need to be able to sit there and be a resource for them versus doing it all for them.
Yeah.
Because it's not the way to go about business. You know, we look at mental health and say everybody out here should pay attention to mental health. But what's that leader 1, leader 2, leader 3? You got 3 different people, 3 different aspects, 3 different views on mental health. You got one that's a veteran who has lost brothers and sisters to PTSD and understands mental health is a huge problem. You got another one that's been on a drilling rig his entire life, has never been taught anything about mental health. It's just go and get it done. And his dad was a roughneck, so his dad just beat that into him, and he's just living day by day. And you got another one who's an entrepreneur who understands that, hey, I'm stressed. I don't work as efficiently, but I got to get this business going, so I'm always overwhelmed, so I'm always dealing with stress. Everybody's different, y'all. And I think what Derek and I have found to be most beneficial to us is just figuring out where that outlet is, figuring out who to talk to. And, let's just call it what it is. If it's therapy or if it's just having a mentor or a friend, or if your boss is truly open to conversation and wants to understand who you are, he's got this figured out to an extent. Great. Talk to him. Voice your concerns. But you got to have somebody. And that's what we're trying to share in this message. It's pretty cut and dry, down to the point. We try and figure out different angles and ways to make this message actually connect with somebody. But the end game, man, be able to talk about your problems when you're having them so they don't turn into bigger problems and combine into this massive explosion. Number 2, like we said, if you're a business, or you're a manager, or you're a founder, or you got employees underneath you or working with you, you got to be able to listen. And The second speech that we're doing at this Damage Prevention Council Excavation Summit is called Closing the Loop, and it's a whole nother piece of it. We're going to dive into, well, I try and ask my employees what's wrong, but he's not listening to me and he's still not sharing anything. Why is that? Maybe my employee doesn't receive information a certain way. He's used to me being very direct. He's an ex-soldier. And if I look at him and say, hey, I noticed you're having this problem. Can we talk about what's going on? Can you tell me what happened over this week? You may not be open to talking. Why? Because he's been driving you like a soldier for the last 6 months. And that's who you know, and that's who you respect, because you're a D mindset, and that's how you receive information. If he were to have come to you and said, Daniel, what's up, man? You're off. And be more direct and be more to the point about asking that question. You may say, man, I'm struggling with some finances at the house. My wife's got some problems going on. I just didn't sleep well last night. I'll be good tomorrow. Let's go. All right, cool. Now we're back on track. But you still know I care. He still asked you in a manner that you received, and you were able to give a response. But until you figure out who one another is and how they operate, it's throwing darts at a dartboard, man, trying to figure out which one's going to save somebody's life.
Yeah. When we talked about it quite a bit on this podcast that we did kind of a deep dive into that and the different aspect angles of looking into it, but without the context on either side, not thinking about the core needs, we'll call them physiological needs. Look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's pretty easy to see unmet needs come out when people get frustrated. You can almost directly pin them back to that pyramid when you see something come up that's frustration or acting out, as some people may call it. But also the lack of context on the communication side. Like you said, we all send and receive information differently. Some of us need not as much detail and hit the high spots. Let's don't get bogged down. Let's go. Some people are a little bit more deep dive, need a lot of context, need time to think. Some people are just a kind of a stability preference, and they need to know that there's security behind what they're doing. They don't respond really well to rapid change, which is for the different wirings and temperaments. You start to see this come out in conversations where the major threats are so clear when you're looking through this lens that if someone who's geared towards that wiring gets that level of threat presented and something challenges them to where that comes up, it's pretty easy to see where they might go off track. And without that exploration into what that looks like, you end up having, it's the death of 1,000 cuts, right? Small things turn into big things, and sure, we put this all behind us and we don't even look at it for the most part right now, forward facing in the industry. But what's the cost of that? You don't ever unpack it. You don't ever talk about it, not only on the mental health side, but the communication side. The spaces aren't created for you to work through that, condition that muscle. Conversations on these kind of levels are tough, and it's not always a natural feeling to go navigate and play inside these sandboxes to get a better understanding of the self and how other people operate as well. So it's not something that's going to change overnight. And just as much as we would like to see employers in the industry respond to understanding more about how important this is and creating more resources to encourage the growth there. We can't put this whole thing on employers as being completely responsible for people showing up every day either. A lot of the work that needs to be looked at is on the self side as well. So regardless of whether you're being given resources or directives, or maybe hasn't been identified how that's supposed to track out yet, you still have a responsibility to yourself to look into how that is for yourself and how you operate inside of people around you and how they operate and what you've noticed about yourself and what you noticed about them. So it's not a one side's doing more than the other or not enough. It's everybody working together to create this conversation and the momentum to figure out how to unpack some of this stuff. And, you know, we talked about our touch points and taking those long drawn out death of 1,000 cuts because nobody's talking about anything that turns into a disruption or a big explosion at some point, and instead putting some well-positioned touch points in place more frequently to start to condition that muscle and build it out. And let's have these conversations around what that looks like through this focus. Whether it's, like you said, your how could look like many different things. It could be as simple as when's the last time you got out in nature and disconnected? That is highly helpful, highly beneficial, just as much as going to therapy is too. It's never going to be one way or the other, and all of the different things can usually help you in some way.
Yeah, but we do make it a point between you and I, getting out and disconnected and finding our own kind of self-centered. We talk to people. We've got our outlets, so to speak. But when you're relying on other people to be that outlet for you, whether that's a friend, family, coworker, therapist, you're on their schedule always. Can they afford to take the time this second to speak with you when you're struggling? This second, finding things to do for yourself that you can do at any point of the day, at any time of the day, is another layer to kind of that self-preservation, right? We talk about it on a couple of our other podcast shows, man. Like I play the handpan, and I like wildlife photography and bird. Those two things clear my head. I get out there, I don't think about work, I don't think about home, I don't think about stress. I'm either focused on that picture or I'm focused on playing that handpan. Going to the gym, another one, focus on the gym. You got to find things that really just help you kind of disconnect from life. But I'm excited about this show, man. We got a couple great presentations that we're going to get to do and get to meet some new folks. Some of you out of Midland, Odessa are going to be traveling up here. I've seen you on LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to connecting with you guys again. And for those of you that haven't met us, we look forward to shaking your head, getting to know you a little bit. These presentations are meant to be more of a personal introduction to just the things we see and cross collaboration with you guys to see what you've seen. You may share something during these presentations. When we start asking questions, we want your input. We want your feedback on it, because I guarantee you somebody out there has thought of something and has a tool or has a method to help others that we haven't thought of or we haven't shared yet. So really looking forward to it, man. It's going to be a great week.
One of the most valuable, if not the most valuable part of being able to do these comes right after the presentations, because there's always there's always some people that want to come up and talk to us about experiences that they've either seen themselves personally or someone close to them has experienced firsthand. And holding space for those kinds of conversations needs to be a lot more normal. And we enjoy that part just as much as giving the presentations, to be able to talk with people and actually understand the challenges they're facing, the hardships that have presented themselves in their journeys on how to get from A to B. How can we bring those topics of conversation up in a way that helps there be a positive impact on how we move forward? That's the only way that we start to get traction on momentum with getting this out there, is talking to people and understanding where they've had success, where they've had more struggles, and actually just listening to feedback that comes up after we are able to have these talks. So more than anything, we're looking forward to that, having some great conversations around this and what we've seen. But like I said, we're we always look forward to visiting with people after the fact and just listening to what they have going on and how we can help.
And if you're not going to be out here for this event, y'all, urge you to get on oneshotgrowth.com, reach out to us. We're happy to share the content, happy to cross-collaborate and talk to you and your businesses as well. So we appreciate you listening, and we'll see y'all next time.
Appreciate you being here with us on the One Shot Growth podcast. If this episode hit for you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and keep the conversation going. And if you want to see what we're building, head over to oneshotgrowth.com. We're just getting started. See you on the next one.